against the machine, and the machine was rolling. And given that I was convinced that the company wouldn't change its mind, wouldn't it be better if I accepted the inevitable, put it down to experience, and moved on? But then I rang Julie, and she told me about the big global company meeting, almost a year in the planning, that was launching the company's new vision of itself. A meeting so big, so hubristic, so tinged with megalomania, it had taken place at the IMAX cinema on the South Bank. In the meeting, the company's new global top banana brought in to reinvigorate things and turned the company into a beacon of business excellence. Well, he stood up and said that when he looked out on the assembled throng, he didn't just see the people who worked for the company, but he also saw all their families. And he said that the great thing about the company was how it retained its staff. And how the knowledge that its staff had was the most important thing for the continued success of the organisation. Honestly, you couldn't make it up. Any doubts I had went straight out the window. Time to attack the barracks. Meeting 3, 11 o'clock, Waterloo. I get into the room early and sit with my back to the door. Traditionally, this would be seen as a position of weakness, as you can't see who's approaching you. Anyone coming in has an advantage over you. But I'm not thinking like that. I'm thinking that if I sit with my back to the door, then whoever comes in will sit opposite me on the other side of the table, and I will be between them and the door, so they won't be able to get out. Well, if you've got a performance plan that lasts 30 minutes, you want to make sure your audience doesn't leave halfway through. Meeting 3, Waterloo, 11 o'clock, I sit and wait. They shuffle in. The senior woman from HR opens her mouth to speak. I don't let her. Before we start, can I ask a couple of questions? She nods. There's already something in my tone of voice that's unsettling. First, the amount you've stated that I'll be paid, that's the minimum you can pay me. She starts to bluster out some explanation, but I cut her short. It's the minimum you can legally pay me. There isn't a way within the law that you could pay me less. Now she's looking worried. Yes, that's the company policy. I switch attention to insert name here. Just one more question. In the 2.5 years I worked in your department, have you ever looked at my portfolio of work? I look directly at him. He hesitates for a moment. He doesn't understand what's happening. This isn't the way this meeting was supposed to go. He answers the question, no. Now they're both on the back foot. They're out in the open in unfamiliar terrain. Something's coming, but they have no idea what. Well, let me help you with that. I'm coming. I've made a plan, I trust the plan, I execute the plan. I read the letter, I start and I don't stop until it's over. I give them no chance to interject, I give them no chance to argue back, I give them no chance to leave. I overwhelm them with a torrent of words. This is how it starts. Oh, and for your sakes, I've edited this down. After all, 13 minutes is a long time to sit through. And it's not you I want to damage. This is how it starts. The first time we met, you read out a letter that explained what was going to happen to me. I listened to your letter, I was unhappy with what it contained. In response, I've drafted a letter of my own. I trust you'll do me the courtesy of listening to it. I think I've got their attention. However you wrap it up, making me redundant is a judgment upon me, and that's the way it will be seen. Making me redundant maligns my abilities, both to the people I work with now and to the people I may endeavour to work with in the future. How do you think it appears to my colleagues on the account that I am the only person on the account who's being asked to leave? It must put a doubt in their mind. I must have done something wrong. For people in the company who haven't worked with me directly, the doubts are even stronger. Also, the company has just launched its exciting, bright new future, one which centres on talented people. Clearly, I'm not one of those, simply not good enough. What other interpretation could there be? And how might my redundancy appear to people who may think about employing me in future? It's not exactly a recommendation, is it? If you want a specific example of how this might work, there's this. 2 weeks ago, I was approached by a headhunter about a job writing copy directly for our client. I turned it down. I was committed to the company. What do you think my chances will be if I were to ring up that headhunter now and ask after that job, having just been made redundant from working on the account? So, if you think I'm just going to roll over while you malign my professional reputation and damage my prospects of employment, you're mistaken. I intend to argue my case to the best of my abilities and in every way I can. I intend to explain my point of view to the people I worked with at the company, and I intend to explain what's happened to the people I've been interacting with in the course of my work at our client. I'm not just going to be someone who is meeting them one week, then not there the next because I've been made redundant, with all that implies about my ability, talents and professionalism. This is the case I'm going to argue. My redundancy and why I think you've made a mistake, both in the decision and in the way that you've made that decision. Last week you told me I'd been selected for redundancy. Clearly, I disagree with that decision. I also fundamentally disagree with the process by which that decision was made. I would argue that what purports to be an objective process is flawed in terms of how the company actually runs day to day, and in terms of how it services its clients, it is cavalier, even reckless. These are strong claims, I know, but if you take the time to listen, I hope that you'll see that my reasons for making them are valid. So here's my case. It's detailed and in some places a little complex, but it's not so complex that it, or its implications for everyone who works at the company, can't be understood. First, why was I being considered for redundancy at all? When I was initially given the news, I was shocked, as was everyone I talked to. Now, perhaps they were all just being nice, or perhaps they were all genuinely shocked. You see, the week before, everyone who worked on the account attended an internal presentation that celebrated how well we'd been doing, how predicted income from the account had been exceeded, and how the amount of work heading our way was about to increase. It was a big thank you to the team, and I was part of the team. So if the account was doing so well, why the need for any redundancies at all? Beyond that, I am confident in stating that no one has a problem with my work or with how I get on with my colleagues, and your recent email has confirmed this point in writing. On top of this, I had been working on the account every day for roughly 20 months. I'd accrued a fair amount both of knowledge and experience. Both these things, I would argue, are of immense value. Anyway, I raised many of these points in the second meeting I had about my redundancy. The response I got in a nutshell was that once a decision has been made to make people redundant, then everyone doing a similar job in the company had to be considered regardless of what accounts they worked on. Really? To me, this is ridiculous, and if I explain how this approach played out in my case, perhaps you'll see why I think it is ridiculous. First, the business decision was taken to cut the number of writers from 5 to 4. The 5 writers in the company consist of 2 older writers with lots of experience on the account, 1 less experienced part-time writer, and 2 much younger writers completely new to the account. So all 5 of us were given a numerical score based on the following criteria: length of service counted for 10%, sickness record counted for 20%, disciplinary record counted for 10%, and performance scorecard, that's the annual performance appraisal, counted for 60%. At this point, I'd like to say that I personally find it distasteful that everyone who works at the company is reduced to a single number. We're not numbers, we're people. But the company, a company that prides itself on being driven by data, when it comes to the crunch, we are all just bits of data on a spreadsheet. What a heartwarming way to look at the people you work with. Having said that, I'm not arguing that data is worthless, but as anyone with any intelligence who works with data knows, what's really important is how you interpret it, how the numerical statistics interact with the real world, and what other factors should be considered before you make a decision based on data alone. In my case, I would argue that the fact that it's been so patently ignored is that I only worked on this account and had done so for 20 months and had considerable knowledge and experience of the account. This apparently wasn't even deemed worthy of consideration when the decision about me had been made. That's absurd, that's stupid, that's reckless, and here's why. Our client, the company's biggest, most important client, now has 1 less full-time dedicated writer working on their account. My work is going to be taken up by the 2 younger writers with no experience of the account who will also be working on other things. How does that make any sense? How is that in any sense a good way to serve the interests of our client, or indeed the interests of the agency itself? But there's more. Having come out of my initial meeting where I was told of my redundancy, I went to talk to my line managers. These are the people I report to day, the ones who best understand the flow of work and what's needed to keep things running smoothly. They had no idea I was being made redundant. It had not been discussed with them, and it had not been discussed with the head of traffic either. As I said before, absurd, stupid, reckless. For much of this, I hold insert name here responsible, and at this point I did insert his actual name. He's the one who is supposed to be in charge of the department, but clearly he has little understanding of how much of the work flows through the department. Of course, you could argue that he is concerned with higher things, and that may be a fair point. But if you're about to make a decision that affects how work progresses through the department, and you're not really on top of that detail, at least be smart enough to consult someone who does know how things work. Clearly, this didn't happen. Absurd, stupid, reckless. I was going to end this letter at this point, but then I heard about the central themes of our new global presentation at the all-singing, all-dancing company relaunch the other day. His theme was how, when he looks at the assembled staff, he sees not staff, but people, and how good the company is at retaining talent and how experience is invaluable. Honestly, the hypocrisy of it is breathtaking. What clearer example could there be of the vast gulf that exists between the corporate bullshit large companies often spout about their values and the reality of how they operate? Anyway, before I go, I thought I'd leave you with this small example of the copywriter's craft. I think it's worth pondering for anyone still working at the company, anyone who, when the chips are down, will be, like I have been, reduced to a number on a spreadsheet. It's a minor amendment to the company's strapline. Be smart, be creative, be kind, beware. All the best. All the best, Rohan. Mind you, you probably don't recognise my name. Maybe I should just sign this with the number 69. Now, given the nature of the company's business, I thought by far the most appropriate way to argue my case would be via a direct marketing campaign. And such campaigns work best when they are accurately targeted. I have the internal email addresses of everyone at the company, and I have the names of the people at our client who I have met and worked with, and their offices are just around the corner. I intend to send a copy of this letter to all of them. I leave that thought with you. I get up and walk out. Feels good. Feels really good. Feels so good, I don't care what happens next. Even if all I get out of it is this moment, you know what? It was worth it. The barracks are burning. What does happen next is that I get an email the following day asking me to send over a copy of the letter. I decline. I kind of like the idea that if they have to share what's happened with other people in the company, then they'll have to say the words that I said. They'll have to articulate all the criticisms I had made. Also, I reason that once they get a copy of the letter, it will go to their legal people and they'll pore over it and no doubt find a reason in the letter why I can be fired. So it's better that they just have it in their heads, nagging away at them, quietly eroding that competent and compassionate view of themselves they no doubt have. Time ticks on. I do a bit of light digging in the garden. Another email arrives in which they set up a phone call during which they will ask me to read out the letter again so they can write it down. So they can write down what I've said, which will enable them to answer my criticisms. I agree to this. I like the idea of dictating what I've said. I like the idea of someone having to accurately transcribe what is, in essence, a fundamental attack on how they operate and the values they hold. I agree because I realise that I've achieved what I set out to do. Of course, part of me hopes that they'll decide to increase what they're offering me